Hiya there. So this is going to be a history book review this evening, and it is going to be probably an anomaly for me. Don't really give top marks to any old book, but this one, I'm going to say straight out of the gate, is probably my favourite French Revolution book. It is absolutely amazing, and I'm going to tell you straight up, this is a 5 out of 5. This is one of the best history books I've ever read in my life, and I'm going to break it down for you now. But first, if you can like the video, and if you subscribe to the channel if you like what you see, and give me a comment to let me know what you think. If you've read the book before, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, but for me, this one was unbelievable. I read it quite a while ago, actually, a couple of months ago. I've read it on Audible. It's roughly 18 hours on Audible. If you get it on paper copy, it is about 450 pages. But this book stands up the test of time. It was originally published in 1941, and the 12 who ruled the year of terror in the French Revolution by R.R. Palmer is, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. It's incredible to think that, you know, with everything that we've got, you know, today, you know, technology wise and information wise, that there hasn't been a, I think Ruth Sker's book on Robespierre was absolutely brilliant. Fatal Purity, that was more sort of narrow for Robespierre, but this one, in terms of analysing and understanding the Committee of Public Safety and the year of terror in the French Revolution, I don't think I've seen anything as good as this. I know that David Andress's The Terror was absolutely amazing from a few years ago, but this, I think this is the premier book. This is the one, really, and it's so prescient for today's politics that we're going through at the moment, and the sort of the cultural breakdown, the cultural sort of polarization that we've got at the moment as well. I think it does, you know, so this one is going to be, I'm going to try and do my best with this one, because I want to give this book the best sort of review I can do. But I would suggest anybody, whether you like this review and this video in particular or not, I would urge you to go and pick the book up. If you love history, whether you love the French Revolution or French history at all, the themes in this book, the people involved, the motivations of the people, and the events are really prescient to today. And I think that, you know, there's a very famous quote that history doesn't history rhymes rather than repeats itself, and I think that if we are going through a rhyme period of similar to this in France in 1793-94, then the best advice would be to keep your head down, but know what's to come by buying the book. So just to give you a little summary of the book, so this really does set the scene. You've had the initial years of hope and compromise and moderation in the French Revolution. So after the storming of the Bastille, you have the National Assembly, you have the king still with a sort of veto. The king is still there with his head before things start to turn. You have the Girondists, and this is where you start to see the factions, namely the Girondists and the more radical wing of the French Revolution, start to clash. And at this point now, which is in, where are we? We're in April of 1793. So the committees set up, the Committee of Public Safety and the Committee of General Security. But really it's the Committee of Public Safety which the book is focused on, whilst it does touch on the other committee. But just to give a sort of an overview, before this time, France was in effectively a bit of a flux, ultimate chaos. It was threatened externally, and its existential existence was threatened both in 1789, the revolution being threatened with potential royalists counter-revolution, and then in 1792, where the Prussians and the Austrians had declared war against the French Republic. You'd had a lot of ex-French sort of landed gentry and emigres influencing royal courts abroad, that this sort of what they deemed to be subversive and evil sort of ideology would spread to their lands. That the spread of ideas couldn't be stopped, and the only way that they could kill the idea would be to kill the revolution itself. Anyways, and so after Valmy in 1792, which was the battle, and the French were victorious, you start to see then in 1793 the chickens are coming home to roost for the Committee of Public Safety, where they, although Valmy was a success, the ideology of the revolution and the that lurch to radicalism is starting to see real world consequences. So what we have in this book, which I found fantastic, is it's not just your average book on the terror where the focus is on and on the Committee of Public Safety. It's just purely Robespierre, Couthon, the cripple, the bloodthirsty cripple, and Saint-Just, who was the young proto-Maoist or Bolshevik, another sort of really guy caught up in the heat of the moment in the revolution. It's important to stress a lot of these people in the Committee of Public Safety before the revolution showed little or no inclination towards the sort of the violence and the ferocity and the callousness of the decision making and of the brutality in which they would deliver upon the enemies of France and of the enemies of the Committee of Public Safety, who were, like in the Vendée, Frenchmen themselves. But what is good about this book is it doesn't focus on those main three. It does give brilliant little chapters and explanations and narratives to all of the Committee of Public Safety. So people like Lazare Carnot, people like R.R de Seychelles, Prière of the Marne, there's the other Prière as well, but all of them, all members of the Committee of Public Safety are covered really, really well in this book, which I was very impressed with. But it does ask the key fundamental questions, essentially, which were, what was the Committee of Public Safety for, and what was it hoping to achieve? And I think it does answer that. It does give you the narrative of the control, the anarchy in which the committee established itself, and sort of snuffed out the anarchy, and then effectively sent France on its way to dictatorship via the committee for the brief year that we're talking about in this book. Eventually the sort of the seeds of its own downfall was sowed at that point, in which they are trying to stop the constant insurrections, they are trying to stop the competing political ideologies from potentially getting a one-up on them, creating some sort of alternative commune or some sort of alternative political representation in which could challenge the legitimacy of the Jacobins and of the Committee of Public Safety themselves as well. So what I've got here, just to touch upon then, was in 1793 in September. I think that's where you start to see that lurch from anarchy to dictatorship. You have the law of suspects, which comes in. Effectively, the law of suspects widened the net, widened the number of offences and suspicions in which somebody who could be suspected as being counter-revolutionary were, that sort of law of suspects made it applicable then for the Committee of Public Safety to snuff out political dissent, to snuff out entirely counter-revolutionary or political rivals themselves, like they did to the Girondists. But at this time, this is where you start to see that famous phrase, which is terror is the order of the day. I think that's Colo Dubois. But terror being the order of the day, what the terror was, from what reading around the topic, from what I take of it, was that like Robespierre said, which was the terror was going to be a vehicle in which to deliver virtue and enable the virtue of people to flourish in this new democratic utopian state, really. A lot of high-minded intellectual, sort of cutting-edge intellectual thought coming in at this point. A lot of, Robespierre was definitely a child of the Enlightenment, and carried around a book of Rousseau with him at all times. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau's ideology of, blank slate, effectively we call it like a blank slate theory, where people are born virtuous and it is the world that makes them flawed. It is the deeds that make them flawed, and if we eliminate and we restrict and regulate the world and the deeds, then people can be virtuous. And it's not that man is inherently flawed or that man is inherently sinful. It is at the time, a cutting edge political theory that has now, at this point in history, meaning 1793, developed into a political outcome. And what we have then is the terror, the law of suspects, the increased amounts of people being jailed in the conciergerie, in the Luxembourg Palace. You start to see a definite centralization of power through the committee. The committee themselves then in September vote to give unlimited authority, in December I should say, of 1793, do vote to give themselves unlimited power and authority. And that unlimited power and authority then is wielded over the deputies themselves who dare to question it. They are, even though that the law of suspects is becoming, is sort of narrowing the ability of people to dissent to the government and to be displeased with how the revolution was going, you still had political opportunities to do so. So you had the Hébertists, who were from the Paris Commune by Hébert, and also you have then the Indulgents or the Dantonists led by Georges Danton, who himself had set up who had been part of the revolution, key member of the revolution up until the point at which his wife had died, and he took a trip away out of Paris to get away from the sort of the crux of the revolution. And that sort of vacuum then had led to Robespierre's ascent through the Committee of Public Safety. And despite the fact that he had worked with Robespierre previously, although they didn't share ideologies 100%, they were much more alike than they were different. But I think, like I said earlier, at this point, being different just wasn't acceptable, and very much in a sort of proto-Marxist, proto sort of totalitarian thought that any differences, doesn't matter if it's any differences, doesn't matter how menial it is, they have to be snubbed out. Power is all that mattered. Conciliation of power is all that mattered, and winning, being in power, being able to tell the masses what to do through the will of the majority. That was coming through definitely at this time. And so moving on in the book, what we do have the as I mentioned, you have the Rousseauian ideas infused in the I apologize. So you have 23 Ventose, which was really where we have the transfer of the revolution from the citizen to the government. At this point, this is where where I've noted down was that the revolution being sort of embodied within the citizen's ability to be free, to throw off the shackles of privilege, throw off the sort of feudalist, hierarchical French structure, and to be a citizen, you know, you have the laws, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which really tried in the early days codified the early sort of beliefs of the revolution, and really freedom of opportunity, modelled on the Declaration of Independence from the United States, but obviously with a firm, you know, unlike the United States where they were setting something up anew, you know, France was definitely remaking itself. They were having to throw off the history of the old in order to remake the new, and whenever that is done throughout history, there is a violent birth. Like all revolutions, from what we've seen for the most part, is that it is a violent birth, and certainly it happened this way too. But with the 23rd of Ventose, the revolution was effectively taken from the citizen and imbued in the government, and any dissent towards the government was seen as anti-revolutionary, counter-revolutionary. It was as if it's a typical political, cynical and insidious turn, in that you are able then, through the will of the majority, or the actions of the majority and the desperate, that you were able to take power, and then at the very same time to shut off that power which enabled you to gain legitimate power. You were then able to sort of say, well, you are no longer the revolution. Your actions have put me here, or us here, and now we are the revolution. And you must listen to what we must say. You must be remade as a man. You must be a new citizen. It was really sort of remaking the world anew with a utopian vision, and I think that, you know, that it was a classic totalitarian move, obviously in retrospect, as we can see now. But the Committee of Public Safety was really what I took away from the book. I don't think R.R. Palmer was as harsh as some of the authors on the Committee of Public Safety. You either get the left wing, who are very kind to the Committee of Public Safety and excuse a lot of the savage bloodletting, and in order to try and understand the high ideals in which the committee were trying to go for, i.e. the Rousseauian utopian version of France. But then you have other writers on the right who focus solely on the bloodletting and totally disregard any motive that the Committee of Public Safety could have had was purely just for self-preservation and for cynical retention of power, where I don't think that the truth lies somewhere in between. You know, you're dealing with people, real human beings, who were, you know, to put it into perspective, probably working about 20 hours a night for years on end, absolutely shattered. You know, they'd never in their lives run a government. There was nothing in their characters before the revolution which said that they were able to put people to death, that they were able to sign death warrants, that they were able to send soldiers into battle, that they were able to requisition things for the army, whether they were able to put down insurrections domestically, to control cities, to avoid civil wars, to negotiate through government, and to manage finances. You know, there's nothing in these people's characters that before 1789, effectively. But I thought the Committee of Public Safety was caught between a rock and a hard place, really. So they felt that they were caught between the radical Hébertists, the Paris Commune, who were, you know, effectively I would say more of a utopian sort of Marxist, proto-Marxist movement, who were more how can I say, they were more radical than the Committee of Public Safety, and the trend that was going in the revolution at the time was that the members of the committee, mainly the Jacobins, were very well aware that they themselves had inherited the committee from the Girondins, who themselves had inherited their power from, effectively a moderate sort of collaborative government between old royalists and privileged nobles with a sort of Enlightenment ideal and the king, and then that themselves was superseded previously before with just the king and his ministers. So as they're going on year by year, you are seeing different forms of government, and I think the Jacobins themselves are trying to sort of offset the lurch further to the further radical. I mean, every sort of government that was coming in the revolution initially was riding the wave of insurrection, riding the wave of the mob to put them into power. And then one of the first things that they all tried to do was to stop that mob from turfing them out. So they didn't mind riding in on the wave, but then they really did want to stop it as soon as they come in. And effectively, one of the one times that they did get averted and they did get stopped, you have the later revolution, attempted revolution in 1832, which is shown in Les Mis. But also you have Napoleon putting down counter-revolutionaries in Paris in 1795, I believe. So, it does happen later on, but the Jacobins were looking to offset that. And on the other side of the Committee of Public Safety, the Jacobins, you have the Dantonists, who were more, although they were still radical as well, on the sort of barometer of where we started off from in 1789, they were more moderate. They felt that the terror had served its purpose. France was not in 1793 or 1794, it wasn't externally threatened. I mean, although nations had declared war on France after the battles of Valmy and Jemappes, I don't think that there was any serious threat of invasion again from Austria or Prussia, and particularly Britain either. Effectively, Britain was looking to sort of see if they could aid the royalist rebellion and Catholic rebellion in the Vendée in western France to overturn the revolution, which was being pretty much driven by the Parisian political scene and the Commune as well. And I think with the Committee of Public Safety, they were stuck in between, and they chose effectively to eliminate both, and that was what they did. First they came for the Hébertists, and then they came for the Dantonists, and beautifully shown in the films Danton and in La Révolution Française from 1989. That is brilliant. I think that's about 5-6 hours long, that movie, to commemorate the 200th anniversary, but that was superb as well. So the absolute powers, like I say, come in on the 14th of Frimaire in December, in which case the committee is pretty much irreproachable for what it does, what it demands. You have what's coming in later on then was price fixing. You had the government had an option at the time because they were severely under pressure. The government was being torn apart from internal and external threats, but the triggers of the revolution, which was desperation, lack of finances, were back in 1793 and 94, and really they had an option. Either the government printed assignats, which was the currency, the government currency, in which case if they print assignats, it devalues the currency and loses confidence of people making purchases, people purchasing assignats, or they price fix, which is what they did. They selected dozens of items, namely sugar, flour, bread, things of that sort, really, other materials as well, that were then price fixed, and that worked to a point, But then what they did then in later on, which was they really then rallied the people against profiteers, hoarders, grain hoarders, and it was a convenient weapon for the government to use to point over there and say, they're starving you. You know, they're hoarding grain, they're hoarding this, they're hoarding that, they're keeping everything from you, they're sort of embargoing barges to coming into Paris. That's what they're doing, rather than the fact that the currency was running away from any seriousness. The price fixing was only really sort of benefiting genuine grain hoarders and people selling key provisions. It was really sort of providing a massive tinderbox again, as it was previously in 1789, not 1989, which really lit off the revolution itself. But what I'll say just before I wrap up is, I think that as the narrative goes on, and R.R. Palmer does it brilliantly, is it really gives you the sort of the context and the scope of what the Committee of Public Safety were dealing with. They were very frightened of losing power. They thought that their ideology, and particularly Robespierre's ideology, that was not worth. It was worth doing a little bit of evil, and it was worth being cruel so that you're able to be kind and generous later. Was really what they were looking for, and eliminating political enemies they thought was going to give them a free hand to implement what they wanted. But the dominoes were already stacked against them. You know, the law of suspects, Ventose, the 14th of Frimaire, irreproachableness, elimination of political enemies. I think then the morphing of, and particularly after the Dandonists had been killed, the morphing of the revolution and the committee into a vehicle for Robespierre's vision of France and his dictatorship. And he's been really, although despite he's one of 12, he is held up as the sort of the chairman, to lack of Chairman Mao type thing. But I think that unfortunately he's a tragic tale, Robespierre, in the sense that, you know, as I covered in the Ruth Skur Fatal Purity video, I think that despite the heart being in the right place, the ability to be to compromise and to be merciful, I think as well was another key factor, in which he greatly lacked, particularly at the height of the terror as well. And subsequently, because of that and his cult of the supreme being, the writing was on the wall later on in 1794, and effectively you had the Paris Commune, after the Hébertists were killed and guillotined, were very sort of confused as to, hang on a minute, you know, why are you guillotining us? We do all the legwork. We're there for you. You know, we're more radical than you. We support the government to a point, but we have a lot more in common than we have differences, other than compared to the Dantonists. So they were confused, and when the Dantonists themselves were guillotined, they were a vehicle for the more moderate anti-terror sort of wing of the convention. The convention themselves got scared, and I think that they acted in Thermidor. The Thermidorian reaction was as much that combination of the two, and the overreach of the Committee of Public Safety by that point, that had made it inevitable that it needed to fall. And it's interesting to see that they, you know, within 12 months that you have that sort of incredible narrative, incredible time to be alive, to have seen that, to have seen the desperation, to have been living on eggshells, you know, to have been destitute, but demanded loyalty demanded from you patriotism demanded from you, whilst you know that things aren't going well. You know, that was an awfully slippery slope, even for the average person in France. But I think, you know, wrapping up on the book just before I finish, I think that, you know, this book does really give you that scope of the Committee of Public Safety overall, all 12, and the narrative is superb. Like I said, this was published in 1941 originally, reprinted many times. And I don't think I've seen it, you know, apart from some of the classics like Edward Gibbon's. I don't think there's an awful lot that stands the test of time in them. You know, particularly the French Revolution is people love the topic. There's books out every year. Every year there's a new interpretation. Every year there's competing political ideologies trying to adopt the same the events to fit their own narratives as well. And whilst that happens every year, for this to stand the test of time is a testament to the work put in. And I think that if you love history, if you're a serious historian, I know that this is requisite reading in a lot of universities and colleges. I think this is one of the ones you must have in your collection. It's unbelievable. I knew the French Revolution before I read this book. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the sort of story, the inevitability of the rise and fall of something that could have been so much greater, but then still was a very incredible moment in history. I think that this is the one. This is the best I've seen, and it really does give, I think, a balanced view as well. It's not politically biased either way, from what I've read, and I think that, you know, this book really does encapsulate. It gives the best of the characters you're seeing as well, all 12. You know, you can read a lot of what's going on, and you can empathize to a point. You know, empathy with somebody who's sending people to death every other day because of either minor infractions or suspicions. It's tough, but I think that with this book in particular, it does put some flesh on the bones of you know, I mean, we're 2 centuries away. You know, we only read what's in black and white, but I think the study and the amount of historical research, put into this book definitely adds some flesh to the bones, which is sorely needed. And I think that you need context as well when talking about the Committee of Public Safety and of the terror. Otherwise, its availability to be used either way for political extremism, left or right, is just so open. But anyways, like I said, I'm going to summarize now and finish off, and I will say get this book. I would say get it on Audible. My tip was, because I was so saturated with information when I read it, I actually slowed it down slightly. The narration is brilliant, the story is superb, and just to recap, I'm giving this book 5 out of 5. It's my first 5 out of 5. It's not the only one, but I think this one is, you know, definitely deserving of a 5 out of 5. And yeah, if you're going to buy one history book, if you're going to decide to say, I'm going to buy a history book, and what's the one I want to read, it's going to tell me about people and about politics and about human nature, good and bad. I enjoy this. I think this is really prescient for our times as well now, and where we can, if we allow our society to be as polarized as theirs was in 1793 and 94, we're in trouble. And things like this can happen again, but hopefully not. But anyways, I'm going to wrap it up now. That's me done. And 5 out of 5, go get this book. It's on Amazon, so you can get it on Kindle for $14.30. Oh, don't buy it on hardcover. That's really expensive on Amazon there. Like I say, get it on Audible, or if you're going to get a paperback version, enjoy it. If you can give me a like on the video, I very much appreciate it. If you've read the book, definitely give me a comment to let me know what you thought about it, and subscribe to the channel, because I'll be doing a few more history book reviews and other book reviews in the next couple of days, as well as some more. I'm going to be doing a Euros video as well, in order for a preview for tomorrow's start of the Euro Championship. I don't know whether it's Euro 2020 or 21.